Right, good morning. I believe we are live now. So, good morning to everybody watching this on the Norwich Guide Dog Forum Facebook page this morning. This is my Wednesday morning in conversation, and today I have the huge privilege of hosting Jerome Mayhew MP, who is the new Member of Parliament for Broadland in Norfolk. And I'll hand over to him in a sec to talk about his constituency and as part of the constituency, because you're new, aren't you? You've replaced Keith Simpson, who was with us for many years before that. And it's just fabulous to have you here. You are our first Member of Parliament who's agreed to come onto the In Conversation, and I'm hoping to host many more Members of Parliament, because issues that affect visually impaired people, guide dog users, their families, and the community generally are things that probably Westminster would be in a good place to be better mindful of moving forward. So would you mind telling us a bit more about yourself, Jerome, and how you came to be a Member of Parliament and what you do? And particularly because this is the Norwich Guide Dog Forum, Broadland touches on Norwich, which bits of your constituency do probably affect the Norwich area. Sure. So over to you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Lana, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real privilege for me as well. And I'm going to start off by saying one of the reasons that I've agreed to come on this, apart from getting an invitation from Lana, and I've learned already that I shouldn't say any no to Lana on anything. But the second thing is I come here from a position of quite considerable ignorance when it comes to guide dogs and the visually impaired, and that's not good for any representative. I'm here to learn from you and from your members as much as I can about the needs of the visually impaired, so that I can better represent you and those needs. Mm-hmm. Who am I? I'm Jerome. I've just been elected last December for Broadland. Before that, I was a businessman. I'm not a career politician. I haven't spent 20 years in local government and moved up. I ran a company called Go Ape, which was a high ropes adventure course business. Nearest one is in Thetford, but we grew it from a startup, which my brother and his wife actually founded it in 2002. I helped out, and then I became managing director in 2009, and we grew from our first course, high ropes course in Thetford, and then around the country. We've got 34 locations in the UK, and then I took it to America in 2010. We now operate in 14 states in the US as well. So we've grown an adventure business, and that was fantastic. But by 2018, I'd been a managing director for about a decade. And I wanted to move on to the next stage in my career. I've always been interested in politics. I've always been a conservative, but quite a passive one. I campaigned in elections, and I supported my local association, but I wasn't front and center. I was busy running a business, and I've got 3 children, a small growing family. But over the last 2 or 3 years, with the Brexit negotiations and the referendum, the frustration which I think we all felt with the lack of the ability of the Westminster Parliament rather, to progress one way or the other, as that real stasis, it affected me. I felt deeply frustrated by that, and I thought, right, well, you can either say they're all terrible, do something else, or you say you want to get involved. So for me, the time was right for me to put it in a professional as managing director of Go Ape, and then to try and get involved in politics. And I've been enormously lucky that Keith Simpson, as you mentioned, wanted to retire, and I was able to be selected by a very roundabout process. And was lucky enough to be elected back in December. So
Well, it's fantastic to have you, Jerome. It really, really, really is. And, as you say, you're kind of new to the whole, when you spend a lot of time in politics, I suppose you get to be familiarised with, certain areas, and your area of expertise has been, business. I have to say I have been to GoA, which is scary. So especially when you can't see, you sort of stand at the top of the zip wire and you go, I don't actually know where I'm going to land. This may or may not end well, but which is fun. But I have to say the staff there were brilliant, at one point.
Well, it's one of the things which I learned a lot about at Go8, which was how popular Go8 was for visually impaired people. And so we developed systems to facilitate the visually impaired getting full access to our sites. And we took pride in being as accessible for as many people as we possibly could. Where we fell down was for wheelchair users, because as you know, you have to be able to climb a rope ladder.
Yes.
And so the way we tried to get around that was working with the Jubilee Sailing Trust, who are a great charity that have tool ships that are 50% of the crew are wheelchair users and 50% able-bodied, and they work together. And so we started off funding a bursary there, but then we quickly realized that a lot of these holidays were being cancelled because they couldn't get enough able-bodied people to be part of the buddy system. And one thing we had at Go8 was an awful lot of able-bodied people. The team is about 1,000 strong now. And so we cut a deal with the Jubilee Sailing Trust, whereby they try and sell their holidays, but if they were, let's say, 3 weeks out and they were missing half a dozen able-bodied crew members, we would provide them from our team. And the holiday would essentially be free, but we would pay the insurance and the food and bev and all that kind of side of things. So our team learned a huge amount from that. It's a really great system.
Well, yes, because that was supposed to be my theme for August. Was basically talking to businesses about, accessible days out and things that visually impaired people can do. As it turns out, all the businesses are frantically trying to make as much money as they can while the sun shines, to make up for all of the months that were lost during lockdown. But I have to say that, from personal experience, we went to GoApe, and a buddy was offered to me. It was offered, a bit of cross wires. In the end, it was a case of, well, the kids went up with me, which was fine. And no, it was great. It was just one of those days, when you land at the end of the zip wire, wrong way up, and it's really good fun. So it's a good way of spending the day out, and I guess you must be really busy, and it's book in advance time, is it? Like there is for all attractions?
It is now. I've stepped back from GoApe entirely now. I tried to have a foot in both camps after I got elected and remain a non-executive director. But I just found it wasn't that there weren't enough hours in the day. There are if you push it. It was just I couldn't get my head into the right. I'm so focused on trying to be a good politician, a good member of parliament. I found it increasingly difficult to give GoApe the kind of knowledgeable attention that it deserved. And so about 6-7 weeks ago, I resigned as non-executive director. And just
well, let's enhance your experience as a politician then, Jerome, shall we? I think that would be and welcome you to the world of visually impaired people in Norwich. Right, so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is obviously, we have a pandemic going on, and we have a virus that there is no known vaccine unless you're Russian at the moment. And the treatments are, it has severe consequences for a significant number of people in society who have other underlying medical conditions. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to say that, a lot of visually impaired people do have other underlying conditions and associated conditions to go along with what is a life-changing disability, I suppose. And so things have had to change in society, and the economy has slowed down. And now that we're out of lockdown-ish and trying to get the wheels back on the bus, there are certain measures put in place in our built environment and in businesses and shops and places that people go that that are designed to keep us safe, that are hopefully in their nature temporary, but are nevertheless difficult for somebody with impaired sight to navigate. So, just a few examples. There's some of the local supermarkets, I'm not going to name any names, others are available, have introduced a traffic light system on the door whereby green will go in, red to not go in, which replaces the marshals. Personally, if there was one installed in my supermarket, I wouldn't know. So I just take my chances and just walk in. But you need to be challenged on that sort of behaviour once to actually be really put off leaving the house. Similarly, a lot of the queuing systems are, with temporary ribbon fences, which are, I'll invite you, when all of this is said, finished and done and dusted, I'll invite you on a blindfold walk to them, and you'll see just how hopeless having ribbon barriers really is. You get, as a long cane user, you'll get tangled up in them, and a lot of guide dogs, bless them, don't really queue into barriers that are above their head level. A lot of them do, and they are trained to do, but unless it's something that they regularly come across, some of them don't. And accidents can and do happen, and because we all know these things exist, that's yet another psychological barrier to going out. So, how would you see, as a member of Parliament, bearing in mind that we have to get the wheels back on, bearing in mind we have to get the economy going, where do you see that fine-tuning of the system lying, and what should and could underpin it to make sure that people who are less able in society aren't left behind and at home? There you
go. Quite a big question.
Yeah.
I think the starting point is, I fully recognise that if you've got a visual disability, then it's hard enough to get out and about without us as policymakers putting further barriers in your way. So that's the first point. The second one is that the coronavirus presented us with an immediate problem, a very immediate problem, where you had to react very quickly, both in terms of the lockdown, but also in terms of how you plan to ease the lockdown. And casting my mind back to the 15th of June, which was when non-essential shops opened, which was the first stage of the relaxation of the lockdown. Councils were working very hard in order to design a way in which they can encourage non-essential shops to open, to encourage confidence in us as shoppers, all of us, to get us back in with a feeling of confidence that social distancing could be maintained. And so they improvised. And that was, in my view, that was exactly the right thing to do. Rather than wait 6 weeks while they get a perfect plan, it was more important to get shops open and to get a safer method of pedestrians getting around towns and villages. In my patch, we're talking Broadland District Council and North Norfolk District Council. And some of those were
places like Aylsham and
Aylsham, Acle, Reetham, Fakenham, those kind of places.
Yeah, that's good. Taverham, right?
Taverham, Drayton, closer to Norwich. And but they were a bit rough and ready. And you're quite right. Some areas used tapes. Other places it made it look a bit like the water board had dug up the road. You had lots of those temporary red barriers, and particularly in Aylsham, Red Lion Street. So the intention was correct. The speed, I think, was correct as well. But an almost inevitable consequence is it made it a lot harder, particularly for the visually impaired. So what we need to do now is to have that level of awareness this is primarily at district council level, that, okay, phase one, we got it open, but we don't stop there. And we now go back and say, look what we've done, consider the needs of less advantaged people, particularly the visually impaired, and say, can we now finesse these barriers or directions so that they are more suitable? Because they're very temporary, or are they? I mean, none of us know how long our physical response to this virus is going to be. We're all hopeful that the development of a vaccination process will be successful, but they may not. We've all had the cold for hundreds of years, haven't we? And no one's come up with a vaccine for that. So we've got to recognise that this may be here, even if we do have a vaccine, for a number of years. In which case, we can't expect visually impaired people to put up with the current ad hoc and temporary design.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be fair. As I said, personally, I'm not one to shy away, but even I find these things actually not just difficult. I mean, we had a conversation offline before. I managed to get myself kicked out of my local supermarket for attempting to go in with my husband, in the depths of lockdown. There was a whole conversation over my head about should she even be out. I was like, you talking about me in the third person? How very dare you? And the whole thing escalated completely out of control, with me being basically pointed out of the shop in front of all of the staff who know me as their district councillor. I'm just like, oh my God, somebody save me.
You weren't surprised.
If the ground swallows me up right now, that would be quite helpful, because this is just, I never thought that would happen to me, but welcome to my world. It's just one of the, but I have some useful sight left, and but there's a lot of people who don't, and with all the changes, and you walk into shops, and silly things like we went somewhere, Jerome, and it's there's signage everywhere. God bless them for putting up all the signs, but they are useless to somebody like me. My daughter and I walked into a jewellery shop, and she said, "Oh, the sign says you can touch anything and try it on, but then put it in a basket afterwards so that it can disinfect it." Well, if I'd gone in on my own, I wouldn't have known. And there's changes and tweaks absolutely everywhere. Do this, don't do that. Can't you do this? Can't you do that? And there's only so many times that, oh, can't you see that you can actually face, a week, day, year.
Some changes. I mean, it's inevitable. There's going to be a lot of changes because the economy is kind of being wrenched around to adapt to COVID, and so a lot of change is inevitable. And it may be that some of them are, you can think about it and not come up with a good solution for the visually impaired. I don't know, but what we should be doing is being aware. I think is the most important thing. That when shops, district councils, politicians, Westminster, a lot of us, when we make changes, we are at the very least aware of the potential impact for the visually impaired, and do our best to mitigate where possible. I accept sometimes it may not be possible for a shop.
I think we have to be reasonable as well. It's exceptional circumstances in many ways still. So for example, one of the things that crossed my desk recently, is the new regulations in terms of pavement licensing, and probably because you probably weren't aware, but there's been a long-standing campaign over many years to reduce street clutter and to get local authorities to make sure that you just don't have random A boards, that any cafes or any other premises that want to trade outside on the street can do so in a way that's organised and not a hazard to a visually impaired or wheelchair user. And that campaign's been long running, and that literally got thrown out of, overnight, overhauled with the new pavement licensing regimes and regs, which said that these pavement licenses will be issued in 5 days, either by the local authority or by default, which obviously allows, when you only have 5 days to issue a license, the possibility of error really does creep in. So I argued quite, and actually I'm quite lucky, Broadland District Council and the officers there and Sean Vincent, the leader, they were very sympathetic and made sure that there is a way of people to alert the local authority to any issues with these, and that the design and access statement that has to accompany the license applications is robust in the way it mitigates for all users on the on the roads.
Well, I mean that's quite a good example of how it should happen, how it should work.
Yes.
Because we've got a balance to strike here. You've got cafes their viability as businesses is in question because they can't have as many covers inside. So other things being equal, we definitely want them to have covers outside. It's much safer because of the ventilation. Because
well,
of the ventilation.
I completely agree. This, the eating out.
It's the balance, on the other hand, but the pavement's there for a reason, and it's for all of us, not just for the people who can see well. Yeah. And there needs to be that balance. And it sounds like Broadland, through your intervention, has got it more or less right. Yeah. Or do you think there's further work to be done there?
I think what is concerning for me is I saw this come up on the papers, and it was like, oh goodness, because when the regs came through, Jerome, the qualities impact assessment that local councils have to do whenever a new policy is introduced did flag up the issue with potential antisocial behaviour, which was mitigated by a conversation and consultation with the police, which are sort of almost an in-house integral unit in a lot of district councils. But the impact on visually impaired people was identified but not mitigated against, not specifically. And in a way, because of the dispersed nature of it, and actually there are relatively few of us in a population at any given time, it just wasn't reasonable to, you couldn't consult on it, because even drawing in somebody like Vision Norwich, Norfolk, the former NNAB, is difficult when it becomes really specific to a particular location. So it's better to have a process in place whereby you do your best in the preparation of the license, but then any issues with it are then flagged up straight back to the council rather than potentially absorbed by the business, where they may not then be addressed later on. So it's just getting those assurances and making sure that the messaging is out there. If you have a problem, let the local council know. If you have a problem in Norwich, let Norwich City Council know. If it's in Broadland, let Broadland District. If you're in North Norfolk, then let North Norfolk know. And it's knowing who to flag it up with. I think it's often the issue, because it's very dispersed. And I presume that you'll know from your casework, often it's people will write to you in complete exasperation because they simply don't know who to contact. And yet it's a one-stop shop if you do.
Yeah.
And it's just making sure that that messaging is out there, and that we talk to each other, so if something gets flagged up with you, know who to address it to, and it gets sorted. So
a lot of people do. I get whatever it is, 250 emails a day from people, And one of the functions that your local member of parliament can serve is as using an awful phrase, a signposter. So we can put people in touch with each other. And I've got a small team that can help with that. So yeah, if some of the people watching this have issues and they're in Broadland, then please do get in touch. But it's not just me. Any local MP worth their salt will be very happy to do that. So that, MPs, we're here to serve. And if you've got an issue like that, even if it's a really local issue, you can get in touch with us and we can help.
No, that's really good. Right, so finally I'm going to move on to so the government has announced that one of the priorities moving forward is getting children back to school. Now, talking about, when we spoke earlier, social distancing is problematic for visually impaired people. I find, on all sorts of levels, when you can't see somebody properly, when you can't make eye contact across the room, when you can't see your environment around you properly, I suppose whether off the back of that or because of that, I am quite, a tactile person myself. And it's because you almost try and get cues from people from, a physical proximity, which has now all been taken away, which is fine because it's the way it has to be and it keeps us safe. But you kind of take a really big source of information out of the information feed loop that a visually impaired person needs, and especially a visually impaired child. So how and this is going to be quite important because there is a significant proportion of visually impaired people, children now, who are in mainstream education supported by teachers and other support staff. How I think what I'm asking you for is it possible for you as a member of Parliament, there's a bit of lobbying going on, to speak to the relevant ministers about this and make sure that there is a bridge, when it comes to that there is, imagine if you couldn't hear at all, and then all of a sudden the government said, well, you now need to walk around with a blindfold. You have had taken away from you your only information input that you had remaining to you. Social distancing does the same thing to visually impaired people. Whatever little information you could gain has been taken away by the distance that has to be between you and other people. So how is this going to be mitigated or accommodated in schools, going back in September, because it's really important. We struggle already with education in so many ways. So that would be a really lovely one for you to think about. If possible.
I've been very concerned over the last few months by the negative impact of the lack of education being offered to all of our students. I've been really worried about the long-term negative impact on educational achievement, on your development of work ethic, on your social life, not so you can have fun, but how you develop social interaction skills, and also on child and adolescent mental health. So I've visited about a dozen of the schools in my constituency over the last month or so, 6 weeks, to talk to heads and chairmen of governors to find out what their plans are for coming back fully in September, and to encourage them, if they needed encouragement, to make sure that, that the plan is that everyone comes back at the beginning of the term, and we're not back to normal, but we're back to normal education and for everyone. I was really pleased that every single head that I've spoken to has been determined, absolutely determined, to get the full school back. But it does, as you say, raise additional issues for students who are visually impaired. I think the minister who's dealing with this is Vicky Ford, and I'm a member of a support group of MPs who are particularly interested in education. And I'll use that forum to raise a specific issue with Vicky Ford and try and get some answers. So there'll be, I think there's two potential benefits for that. One is the fact that you're asking raises its profile, and I may be able to get some specific answers right now as to how the plans are going to be put forward. But we need to remember that each plan is individual to the school. It's developed by the head with their governors, following recommendations and guidelines from the Department of Education. But it is very much the individual head creates a plan that's suitable for his building and his teaching environment. And of course, you only have to think about it for 5 seconds to realize that's the way it has to be, because every school is different, both physically, but also in the how many visually impaired students do they actually have, for example, and the plans have to be local, but the direction should be from central government.
Yeah, I think part of it is that before the world fell apart, as we know it, I suppose every piece of legislation was underpinned by the Disability Discrimination Act in whatever iteration it was, and I think I suppose some of those principles have perhaps been eroded over the last few months. And I just feel that, as a society, we need to reinforce those principles again, because, I've said to you before, any administration is only as strong and as successful, is measured by the way it treats those least able in society. So we all move together, rather than leaving the weak behind. But this is this is not Sparta. I fully accept that I would have been thrown over a cliff by now. Able. I get that. I am thankful in my own special way. Yeah, but it's important that we start reinforcing those principles, and I suppose that's why I'm talking to you as a member of Parliament. It would be helpful if collective is like, we're doing that, and that's brilliant. Can we just spare a thought for that? Who's going to address that side of it? That is potentially an issue. It's not to throw a spanner in the works as such, but it's to make sure that actually somebody is covering that. It might not be Parliament, it doesn't need to be expensive, it doesn't have to, cost the world or be a showstopper, but it's like with a pavement, furniture, there's a way of arranging the furniture in your living room where everybody can get by to, on their desired lines. Or you can scatter it around so that, the moment Granny walks in the middle of the night and forgets where the light switch is, she falls over and breaks her leg. There's ways of doing things that, can either be better or worse. And I think if we can start striving for better, we can hopefully, come out of this in a really good way where we all sort of look back and go, wow, well, that was an experience. And things have moved on and we've learned a lot, and a lot is positive. And
my take on that is, of course I agree. One of the benefits, and there have been some benefits that have come out of COVID, is it has shaken up government.
Oh gosh, I'm loving Zoom.
And we're loving Zoom, and things which we thought would take 6 years to get a policy change on happen in 6 minutes.
I know.
And that's really fantastic. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want, not that I'm just a backbencher, but if I had my say, I would try and keep as much of that dynamism and speed in decision making as possible.
Yeah, except when it comes to the white paper on planning. I'm just putting that one in there. Yeah.
I know. So I want to keep that speed, and I don't want to decision-making process to get bogged down in 18-month reviews on this, that, and the other. But at the same time, we can't chuck the baby out with the bathwater. No. It's an attitude thing rather than a regulatory thing.
It is.
And it's just people like me who, yeah, I'm fully able-bodied. I don't have, my circle, my network of friends is substantially able-bodied as well. So what I'm saying is I don't have that sort of background of personal experience, which innately informs me, properly informs me of some of these issues that we're talking about. So it's just really important. But it's that's why it's important for me to be here today and doing things like this, so that you can bend my ear, and that background attitude is correct. And I think it's look, I've only been there for 6 months, and I've got to know quite a few of the members of Parliament. I'm pretty confident that the kind of people I've met on either side of the House, they want to do this well. So if we get the attitude right, then I think it will feed through in all decision-making processes. But
I completely agree with you. I mean, Chloe Smith has been instrumental in a lot of policy to
I think she's a very impressive politician.
She's been extraordinary. So her work through the Cabinet Office has just been amazing. So there is work going on around the tests for the home test kits for COVID, to make sure that they are fully accessible. That work is progressing significantly and doing really well, and being properly stress tested to make sure that it when it goes out, that it actually works and does what it's supposed to do for everybody. So there is some incredible, amazing work going on, and that it's I suppose I'm just highlighting a couple of the sticking points that it's not difficult to address, but it does take a slightly different approach, and slightly more awareness, as you say, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're all here. We've all built this society in the way it is. We are all part of this incredible country and its resilience. It's let's all stay in that same boat. So paddling in the same direction.
And I want to sort of inject a note of optimism at this stage, because I mean, COVID has been a disaster. We wouldn't wish it on ourselves, but with any kind of shock like this, I think it does unleash dynamism, because with things like this comes opportunity, and I think it's opportunity both economically, seeing how business is already reacting to COVID, how there are definitely some losers like international travel. But there are some winners. Domestic tourism. We've been exporting tourism for decades, ever since the invention of the jet engine, and it's coming back. And there's a lot of opportunities there, and we see on the news, there's lots of job losses, and there are going to be some more, a lot more as the furlough scheme runs down. But there are also a lot of jobs being created, and I've seen them just in Broadland, where whether it's in the tourism sector or in the food processing sector up in Fakenham, Kinnertons, and Linda McCartney, both looking to recruit a lot of people because their business has exploded. And it's that sort of twisting of the economy, and then we're all going to adjust to it. But it's also the twisting of the sort of morphing of our government and how we govern ourselves. I think people expect now more from government, because they've seen what government can do. When it really has an emergency, it can do amazing things, and that's a great thing. And I want to keep as much of that dynamism as possible, because there's I dread to mention the word Brexit, but there's also that happening, and there's an opportunity. There's opportunity, whichever side you felt about Brexit in the first place. The fact of this change brings a lot of opportunity to make things a bit better. So I'm quite optimistic.
I think just simple things sort of highlighted how we, when it came to when we first went into lockdown, is that we didn't have enough PPE manufactured in this country, and all of a sudden, out of everybody's making PPE, and similarly the test kits, which were, I know that within the EU family, nobody was supposed to hoard resources, but it sort of did happen a little bit when it came to the test kits. Yeah. And, so that will then, that now encourages manufacture of these, resources in the UK. And I think similarly, we're going to, have a renaissance of manufacturing, because with, international trade and movement, across borders being impaired as it is now due to COVID, we will see a lot more being made in this country. So I think it's an amazing opportunity, and it's been obviously emphasised by the fact that the borders have actually become borders and barriers, haven't they, in many ways? Yeah.
Well, I don't think globalization is going to reverse. We're still going to look to have specialists producing a thing and dominating globally. That's probably still going to continue. But when we're taking economic decisions, we're going to be looking at strategic security as well, in a way that 6 months ago we just didn't. So as you say, PPE, it's no longer good enough to say, oh, you can get aprons from China. Well, when you need them, can you? And maybe it is more sensible to have some onshore capacity from a strategic position. And I think that it's not just government, but as a business owner, when you're taking decisions as to where you have your contracts for suppliers, security and dependability of supply is going to be an enormously important thing. And the shorter your communication line between you and your supplier, the better. Even in my own experience with manufacturing apparel in my Go-Ape days, we tried in India, and then we moved to Turkey. And in the end, we manufactured in the UK because it was more reliable and more flexible as well, because the lead-in times were shorter. So there is a real opportunity for dynamic businesses to grow, to feed into, to exploit these new markets, because they're there. I know that there's an awful lot of people who, dislocation creates awful problems and human heartache, and if you've lost your job, it's a terrible thing. But there are also opportunities being created here, and we need to maximize those and use them as the springboard for our future economic growth.
Yes, which I'll probably have to have you back in a few months' time, and we can have a bit of a chat about work and disabled and visually impaired people, because that's another one of my massive bugbears. So we can have a chat about that one once the dust has settled and everything. Yeah. Okay. So, right. Okay. Thank you so much, Jerome, for your time. And thank you, everybody who's been watching this live on the Facebook page. This has been, an amazing treat to have Jerome with us here today. And I thank him immensely for stepping in at the last moment and, taking up this opportunity to learn and to talk about, what's affecting us on a day-to-day basis in this slightly post-lockdownish world. I mean, next week, I'm hoping to host one of the businesses in Broadland that runs passenger boats from Wroxham. So it would be great to hear from them, to see how they've adapted to social distancing, and how perhaps the experience can be made better for visually impaired people when going there, and just let you know how things are running at the moment, and how you can book yourself a really lovely day out. I mean, look at the weather out today. It just couldn't be more glorious on the water. I know I talk about the Broads an awful lot. I'm really fond of them. So yes, so at that point, I'll thank you so much, Jerome, and thank you everybody to listening on Facebook, and I will bid you farewell and see you next week. Thank you.